So I don't think that the right is inherently racist, but they definitely have a racial blind spot. I want you to listen to Charlie Kirk here.
Hello, my name is Malcolm, and I guess my question to you today is, when did systemic racism end, and what is your definition of systemic racism?
Systemic racism is a law on the books that prohibits an individual from doing something based on their race.
He is correct about that. Then that's about where him being right sort of ends.
It largely ended with the Equal Rights Amendment and the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s.
Okay, he's right about that.
And so do you think that it just ended right then and there, and there's no lingering effects of that could...
Okay, let me, this is an intelligent question. This is a problem that I have with the political right in this country. This kid is asking an intelligent question. This is a valid question. After centuries of enslavement and decades of Jim Crow laws, right? Or almost a century of Jim Crow at the end of the Civil War or whatever, this is a valid question to ask. There's something here. And the right always acts, when this question gets asked, they always act like you're asking a stupid question. That's how they treat it.
You know, kind of explain some of the disparities we see today?
If the hypothesis of lingering intergenerational 60-plus year effects are true, then you must tell me how Jews have done so materially well post-Holocaust.
This is the worst possible example he could use. So he comes back, he treats this question, he's being very dismissive here, and he's treating this question as if it doesn't have any validity. But then he comes back, this intelligent guy who's this master debater, comes back with this horrible take. I mean, this is a horrible take. Listen to how he rolls through this disaster of a take.
Everything being taken from them.
Well, I don't think that's a one-to-one.
You're right. Jews had it much worse than blacks.
Well,
Jews had it worse than blacks. Okay. Not Jews in America. Jews in Germany had it worse than blacks in America, for sure. But Jews in the United States, of which there were about 4 million at the time, pre-World War II, there were about 4 million Jews living in the United States who hadn't suffered through the Holocaust yet, who had built multi-generational wealth. So even the Jews in Germany who lost everything and had to come to this country as immigrants had a Jewish community here that was successful and wealthy to bring them into the country. Jews did not have Jim Crow laws. There was never a law in the books, certainly at the federal level, I don't believe at the state level, that restricted Jews in any way from engaging in the economy. So this is a very, very disingenuous argument that Charlie Kirk is making. It makes me very, just gets under my skin.
I think that
have black Americans ever had a crazy fanatical dictator trying to kill half their population in a span of 5 years?
We have been enslaved for hundreds.
No, that's not.
I mean, it's not a fair comparison.
Question. I'm saying Jews actually had it far worse than black Americans did in the 1930s and 40s.
Jews in Germany had it far worse. This is such a disingenuous argument. And here's what bothers me the most. He goes to these schools as if he's going there to have this good faith argument about these issues and have these real conversations about these issues. And he's not. He's going there for material to put on his page to get clicks and likes. That's it. He's no better. He's a grifter like everybody else, just like the left-wing grifters, like your Sam Seaborns and your Pac-Man and those guys. He's not any better. And this is the problem with the right. I've had a problem with the right on this stuff for a long time because the right, they're the ones who elevated the culture war. They elevated the culture war because it was beneficial to them because they don't have an economic solution either. They're big government, big tax, foreign war. They're not economically, there's not a significant difference between Republicans and Democrats. So when the left went off the deep end to the far left, the right loved it. The best thing you could have done to win the culture war was just ignore it, not elevate it. They elevate it because now they had something to attack the left on. That was going to be an 80-20 issue across, for most Americans. And so they elevated the culture war and made it worse than it would have otherwise needed to be. If they had just ignored it, we could have moved on for it. But they don't have an economic answer. And he doesn't have an economic answer for this young man either. And maybe he doesn't understand. Maybe he hasn't looked at the history. But this is a terrible take by him.
But do we have to look at Jews as how we should, like black people should?
No, I'm saying you have to prove the argument that it applies to other groups. So your argument is that things.
No, so this is a fallacy. I didn't switch the screen there. This is a fallacy. He doesn't have to prove that argument. He doesn't have to prove that argument. And the reason is because he can stand there and say fairly that nobody had it nobody has had the unique experience of chattel slavery and Jim Crow and everything else that the black community in this country has gone through. If you want to answer that, look, if you want to have the conversation, but have it in good faith. I can give you this. I've done a video on this before, and I can give you the answer for why systemic racism is actually still playing a role for African Americans today, even though our nation is no longer systemically racist. And the answer is pretty simple. In the 1960s, in the late 1960s, we decided to do this, like, whatever, deal with Lyndon B. Johnson, where we're going to massively expand the welfare state. The impact of that decision has impacted whites and blacks. Okay. Now, the right always wants to point to single parent households as a big cause for what's going on in the African American community in the United States. Let me just share some numbers with you, going back from 1970 here. I don't know if you can see this all the way to 2016 or not. So in white single parent births in 1970, 5.5%, black or African American, 37.5%. By 2016, the white rate was 35.3%, and the black rate was 69%. That's a 7 times. It's doubled for the black community, but it's increased by 7 times for the white community. African Americans were more vulnerable to what was going on in the late 60s and the early 70s. It's impossible to say that coming right out of Jim Crow that African Americans in the United States weren't more disadvantaged than whites were. So when this welfare state explosion happened, absolutely more African Americans were going to get sucked into that than white Americans. On average, they earned about 30% less than their white counterparts. And you can't go back to 1967 and say that didn't have anything to do with systemic racism, because, of course, that was when systemic racism was real and it was on the books. The second thing that happened is we gutted our manufacturing sector, which left a lot of African Americans who'd moved into the city to follow those jobs unemployed, which they also got swept into this welfare state. And when you talk about black crime and this stupid, easy to debunk 1350 stat, the fact of the matter is that if you take poor people, low-income people, and you compress them into densely populated areas, you're going to have higher rates of crime in those areas than if you take poor people and spread them out over the countryside. I've said this before. People of color tend to live in the city, and they tend to live in densely populated areas. So if they are low income in densely populated areas, you're going to have more crime. And that's where the police are going to go. They're not over-policed. Police are just going to densely populated areas where there happens to be a lot of crime. If you took all the white people out of the trailer parks, all the poor people all across the country, all the poor whites, and you compress them together and you spread the people of color out, you would absolutely see those crime rates flip. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. That's the problem with the arguments that the right makes. They don't address the actual issues. So the issue is yes, there are holdovers. How do you fix that problem? You fix that problem through economic freedom. You don't fix that problem. The government can't solve that problem. The government caused the problem. You fix that problem through economic freedom. You fix that by reasserting property rights. You do that by reducing the cost of doing businesses, particularly in these inner city areas where tax rates are incredibly high. You fix it through removing government from the equation there to the greatest possible extent. But to say that what the African American community went through in the United States is not having an impact, that they were not swept into that stuff more so, they were not hurt more by that, it's impacting the white community just as much. The white community is also seeing the effects of government meddling in socioeconomic affairs. What's happening is people in your community who are most vulnerable are going to suffer faster due to bad economic decision making than people who are less vulnerable. So it's taking longer, but it's eating away at the whites just like it's eating away at the black community. There's not a difference here. It's just that the African American community, unfortunately, because of systemic racism in the 60s and 70s, had a head start. 60s and 70s, dating back to the end of the Civil War, the African American community had a head start when we did all this stuff in the 70s. And the government got involved in replacing fathers in the home and becoming daddy and kicking fathers out of the house. That's what's going on. And so it makes me angry when the right, when Charlie Kirks and the Candace Owens and these people put these videos up because they're afraid, they don't want to address the real issues either. That's it. This video made me mad. I just wanted to share that with you all. I hope you stuck around to the end. Like, share, subscribe. Have a great day.